Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the launch of Africa Climate Action Initiative. I'm so glad you're all joining us today. And as you start to trickle in, I want to invite you to sit comfortably, be at home, be safe, and kind of let us take you on a journey in between explanations of what's happening on the ground in Africa in terms of climate effects, but also powerful climate action that's being taken and powerful solutions that are going to inspire us all today. So as you know, we are launching the Africa Climate Action Initiative. My name is Alienor Rougeot, or Ali, if it's easier for you. And I'm the coordinator of Fridays for Future Toronto. So we're the movement that organizes the youth climate strike that you may have heard of in the GTA. We're a youth-led movement with a really powerful team of people from university, but also high schools that are trying to fight to have the future we all deserve and to have a livable planet for everybody. And we're really honored to, through me hosting you today, participate in this wonderful initiative that's being launched. So thank you so much for joining us. I want to start by acknowledging the land on which we are in. And I, like many of our speakers and many of you maybe, am an uninvited guest, a settler on traditional Indigenous territory. We acknowledge the land we're on, not just because it's a box to tick, not just because it's something we must do, but we do it because the place we now call Canada has purposefully taken Indigenous voices out of its history, taken Indigenous people out of its system, of the decision-making places. And so by acknowledging the land and the land on which we're on, we're not reestablishing all of that. We're not solving all those problems, but we're taking a first step and making sure that we recognize that we know that everybody is aware of it. And when we talk about climate change, it's especially meaningful because Indigenous people are the ones that have taken care of the land for millennia, are still responsible for most of the biodiversity in the world, and have the knowledge that's going to be essential for us to tackle climate change and the other environmental issues that we're facing. So it's extremely important for us. I also want to remind you that we're all treaty people, so we should all know the treaties that are for the part of Canada that we are on. So I encourage you to look that up. The information is really easily available on the internet, and it would be a good step towards decolonizing our lives, our movements, and our decision-making places. Tonight, as I've mentioned already, we are launching the Africa Climate Action Initiative. And there is a fundraising aspect to this. So because you're watching this on YouTube, you're gonna see a chat box. We're gonna be putting links throughout the night for you to click and interact with us. And one part that would be great is if you could donate whatever you can for this initiative. We are going to match the first $500 with another $500. So your action will be doubled, and you can just find that link in the group chat. It is very easy. Your gift will go directly to launching this initiative and supporting climate action on the ground with our partners on the African continent. So I thank you all for being with us today, and I welcome you to the start of this launch. We are here to recognize the incredible action, the incredible resilience of people across the African continent in facing climate chaos. African communities and organizations are working hard to adapt and to mitigate climate change. So we are launching this action in support of their efforts from here, while our partners are on the front line of climate change and of the effects of them. To everyone tuning in right now, welcome. I really encourage you to find Africa Climate Action Initiative on Twitter and Instagram. It will be great to receive pictures, reactions, comment from you, and use the hashtag. You can start right now on Twitter, hashtag Africa Climate Action. If you have questions for our speakers we can ask them at the end. Please put them in the chat box on YouTube, and we will have a little question period at the end. Once again, welcome, and I'm now going to welcome our first speaker, Lynn Adamson. Lynn is the co-chair of ClimateFast and the co-chair of Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. She has been a long life advocate for peace and environmental justice. And as Mia being part of the Fridays for Future movement, I can tell you she's been a big supporter of youth empowerment and youth activism as well. She is a Quaker, a mother, and a grandmother. And she's going to be providing us with a context to the global climate crisis. Now, Lynn, if you are with us, I now welcome you. Let me just activate your profile. There we go. Here you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as the co-chair of ClimateFast, I wanted to say that we're really supportive of this initiative as a way to connect Canadians with the impacts of climate change in another part of the world, and to give us a way to both understand that connection better and to help. First, we're going to show a short video on the impacts of climate change on sub-arid regions of Africa.
At Paris in 2015, governments committed to keeping human-made global warming below 2 degrees, ideally limiting it to 1.5. Climate model forecasts suggest that without rapid cuts in greenhouse gas emissions, we will pass the 1.5 degree mark as early as 2030. ACAI set out to examine the impacts of different levels of global warming on the semi-arid areas of 6 countries in Africa, where people and the environment are already sensitive to heat and drought. We found that average local temperatures in these countries are expected to increase much more than the global mean, and progressively faster at each level of global warming. Heat waves and extremely hot days will also become much more common. Some areas will get less annual rainfall, others more. But across all areas, rainfall will be more erratic, with longer dry spells, and more intense rainfall on days when it does rain. For example, the semi-arid areas of Kenya are not only expected to get more rain, but to have rainfall that is 25% more intense at 1.5 degrees and 34% more intense at 2 degrees. Flooding is likely to worsen, with flood-related losses and damages predicted to be 20 to 40% greater at 1.5 degrees. Increased flood frequencies in recent years suggests these changes are already happening, with the floods of 2012, 2013, and 2018 being particularly extreme. Water stress will increase across most semi-arid areas. Higher temperatures and longer dry spells will mean more intense droughts, and water levels in rivers, inland deltas, dams, and groundwater are likely to drop. For communities in semi-arid Ghana, where groundwater is vital, predicted decreases in this resource of 17% by 1.5 degrees of global warming and 25% by 2 degrees could have dire consequences. For communities across these semi-arid areas where livelihoods depend on crops and livestock, these local climate changes will pose serious challenges. Unless they adapt effectively, their rain-fed agriculture and livestock will become less productive, increasing the risk of famine. For example, in Namibia, the productivity of small-scale crop farming could drop by 20% at 1.5 degrees of global warming and by 40% at 2 degrees. More frequent droughts in Ethiopia could cause a 30% decrease in cereal production and a 70% decrease in herd sizes. Human health and well-being will also be affected. In Mali, at 1.5 degrees of global warming, there could be an extra 22 days per year of extremely dangerous heat stress, and 37 extra days at 2 degrees. In Ghana, heat stress at 2 degrees of global warming will reduce productive work hours by 15%. Disease patterns will also change. In Ethiopia, new areas within the highlands will become suitable for mosquito breeding, causing malaria transmission to increase by as much as 76% at 1.5 degrees of global warming and 120% at 2 degrees. Climate change in semi-arid areas is real and is happening fast. The vulnerability of people, their natural resources, and their economies to even small amounts of global warming reinforces the need for urgent action to reduce global emissions in line with the targets agreed to in Paris. Africans need to push for more ambitious international pledges on emission reductions that will keep global warming below 2 degrees. At the same time, governments need to accelerate adaptation planning and prioritize early implementation to address the fast-growing impacts in these vulnerability hotspots.
So thank you for showing the video. What we're going to look at now for a moment is what is Canada's role in creating these emissions. So the first slide that's up is from 2017, and that's showing emissions per capita in each country. You can see that Canada is like red, as all of North America is, which means that it's high emissions per capita, very high emissions per capita. And 15 tons and up. You can see that the African countries' emissions are barely visible. Very, very little. So one estimate I've heard is that Canadians on average cause 50 times the emissions of the average Kenyan. I'm sure most Canadians do not realize this, but it has very big implications for parts of the world that are not causing the emissions. Knowing this, you would think we'd be taking steps to end our reliance on fossil fuels and to stop expansion of the industry. So the next slide is disturbing. So on this slide, you can see oil and gas expansion that's planned over the next 5 years. And you can see that it's concentrated in the central west areas of the US and Canada, including the tar sands. Next slide, please. So on this temperature graph, you can see where we are, and we're getting dangerously close to the 1.5 Paris Agreement goal. And we know that warming continues on from what we have put in the atmosphere already today. So we really need to be acting quickly, because otherwise we are going into dangerous levels of warming. And you can see that the best contribution that we can make is to stop fossil fuel development and fossil fuel subsidies and convert as quickly as possible to renewables and conservation. To keep that temperature rise to 1.5 requires cuts in emissions of 7% per year, each year for the next decade to 2030. Next slide, please. If we fail to stop temperature rise, desertification across the sub-arid regions will get much worse by 2040, causing extreme food shortages, water stress, and mass migration. We can't let it get this bad. So what kind of climate action can the wealthy countries come up with? Wealthy countries have made a long-standing promise to raise $100 billion per year in climate finance starting in 2020. Canada's share is $4 billion per year. We have yet to learn if these funds are going to be forthcoming at this time of COVID, but they're urgently needed to help countries skip fossil fuel dependence, going directly to renewables, and to help countries adapt to the climate change that is already taking place. In addition to government assistance, it is really important for grassroots connections to be there, from communities in Canada to communities in Africa. This is what we are building in this partnership with Africa Climate Action Initiative as part of Canada-Africa Partnership. So here's an opportunity to get involved. Thanks to generous donors, $500 contribution tonight, your contribution will be doubled to help us get this fund started. Please donate now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you. Those numbers, that video, they always scare me a little bit. What gives me hope is what's coming next, which are the variety of solutions we're going to bring to you and ways you can help, and ways others are already helping. So speaking of how we can help, I want to introduce you to someone that's played a huge role in making this launch and this whole initiative possible, and that is Claire Holloway Wadhwani. She's the Executive Director of Canada-Africa Partnership. She's been the executive director since 2010, and she brings over 16 years of experience working with NGOs in Canada, East Africa, and India, focused on reducing inequality, advancing food security, promoting health and livelihoods. And she focuses on vocational training, on entrepreneurship, and more recently on climate-smart enterprise development. That sounds great to me. Claire has a passion for grassroots participation and the efficacy of community-based initiatives as both a means of advancing community development goals and effectively engaging with community partners. Claire, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for those kind words of introduction. And thank you all for joining us. We are the Canada-Africa Partnership Network, or CAP Network. We are a collective of Canadian and African communities who operate under one organizational umbrella. We do so because we believe that by sharing resources, building capacity, and fostering human-to-human connections, that we can increase our collective impact and build the kind of solidarity that it really takes to build a socially just and sustainable future for us all. So when we were first approached earlier this year by the group that has come together to form the Africa Climate Action Initiative, we jumped at the opportunity to house this under our network umbrella. We immediately recognized the synergies between our visions with our shared focus on capacity and on working together on solutions to common challenges. We also knew that it was time for us to up our game on climate change. Climate change is, I believe, the defining issue of our time. Much like HIV and AIDS and gender equality became cross-cutting themes that permeated through development work in the region in recent decades, so now will climate change adaptation become an important cross-cutting issue as we move forward. No matter the focus of our projects and our work, we will need to be considering the impact that a changing climate will have on project design, on implementation, and on our results. I truly believe that this initiative is going to strengthen the capacity of all of our existing and future partner projects in Africa, enabling us to support communities and continue to deliver responsive, high-impact projects and services, no matter the climate-related challenges that may arise. So I want to thank you all for being here for this evening's launch. I truly hope that you'll choose to engage and be involved, whether it's as a donor or a volunteer or a contributor to capacity and shared learning opportunities. And as such, I hope I get a chance to meet with you and work with you as this initiative takes flight. But for now, I'm just going to join the rest of you in listening and learning from this amazing lineup of speakers. Thank you all again very much, and I'll be around for Q&A at the end as well if you have any questions about our work or how the network functions. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Claire. And as Claire mentioned, you can ask Claire questions by putting them directly in the YouTube chat box, so please don't hesitate. A reminder, you can also interact with us, giving us your ideas, reactions, feelings at #AfricaClimateAction. So now that you're familiar with the CAP network, I want to welcome you and introduce you to the lead coordinator of Africa Climate Action Initiative, and that is Sarah Kamau, as you can see on your screen. Sarah is a change agent and a social entrepreneur. She's passionate about championing for the rights of the less privileged through advocacy and community development. While living in Kenya, she graduated with a Bachelor's of Education from the University of Nairobi and worked in various national and international organizations in refugee camps and in the humanitarian field. Through these experiences, Sarah has witnessed firsthand loss of lives and livelihoods, and forced migration due to climate change. This is what inspired her to start the Africa Climate Action Initiative. Sarah, we're really happy to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Sarah, as you've heard, And I'm so excited to be around and also talk about Africa Climate Action Initiative. As you've heard, Africa Climate Action Initiative is an initiative of CAP Network. And next slide, please. And we started Africa Climate Action Initiative simply because Africa is one of the countries that is only producing about 2 to 3% of the world carbon dioxide emission. Yet it is one of the great continents that is greatly affected by climate change. We are saying that according to Global Harvest Initiative, that by 2050, Sub-Saharan Africa will only be able to fulfill 13% of its total food needs to the current population, meaning that 87% will not be addressed. So we are bringing organizations together, next slide, that is drawn from Africa. Next slide, please. We are bringing organizations together, and the reason why we started Africa Climate Action Initiative is actually 5 main objectives, but one of the main objectives is to create awareness. To create awareness both in the developing countries and also in Africa. At the same time, we are creating a platform whereby organizations can actually come together, share lessons learned, and even above that, be able to access resources that are available in fighting against climate change. Next slide. So our membership is drawn from 6 countries, as you can see, and so far we have 7 organizations. Next slide. Today, I'm just going to talk about climate change in East Africa. We're saying that in Eastern Africa, the main economic activity is agriculture, while in Somalia, the main economic activity is livestock, then followed by tourism. So how has climate change affected the main economic activity in Eastern Africa? Next slide. As my colleague Lynn mentioned, that carbon dioxide emission per person, per country. If you look at the slide, you can see that developed nation, China is producing 15.6 metric ton, while somebody in Kenya could be producing 0.3 metric ton. That means that that person, an average Canadian is actually producing 50 times more carbon dioxide emission than somebody who is based in Kenya. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the effects of climate change, and the effects of climate change is not just the tangible effect that we all know. We know that there's always flood, there's drought, and there's displacement, and there's food insecurity. So you can see, like right now, there are floods in Kenya. I'll give an example of Kenya, whereby last year alone, there was drought in the beginning of the year, and then floods in the middle of the year, and even now, right now, there are actually floods, and floods have affected nations. So climate change is not only affecting food security, it is also affecting wildlife. Last year it was reported in Zimbabwe that over 200 elephants died, yet that country is actually relying on food, on farming and even tourism. Next slide. So other effects of climate change that we could be talking about is things like depression, anxiety, mental health. When a farmer keeps on planting their crops and their crops fail, how does that work to the farmer? They've already put a lot of agricultural input, a lot of resources in. What about the effects of climate change to family disintegration? And this really affects family, where marriages break, and also because of displacement. Also, we see that other cases, for example, of gender-based violence and domestic abuse happening because of climate change. These are some of the intangible effects that have not yet been measured, but they are coming up because of effects of climate change. Next slide, please. What has East Africa done? We've said that we've come up with climate change action plan, whereby the government have implemented that. At the same time, the organizations, they're trying to mainstream the effects of climate change. But also now we have another person that has come, the third party that has come to join in the fight, to come and destabilize the food security, and that is the current COVID situation. That now the countries that actually were recovering from floods, they are now having to face the lockdown, which is already affecting COVID situation. Next slide. In that case, we are saying that how has COVID situation or coronavirus, as many people would call it, how has it affected the effect of food security? And we are saying that it has affected livelihood, it has affected employment, it has affected even the food value chain in terms of accessing inputs, accessing food from the farmer to the end user. So the whole value chain again is already coming, the whole value chain of between the farmer and the distributors has been affected by climate change and being compounded a lot by the COVID situation. Next slide. So you can see that these are some of the food security issues that we are going through because of COVID situation, whereby even the food hawkers are being whipped because they have to face a lockdown situation. Next slide. So as an advocate for climate change, I propose that let us mainstream climate change in all sustainable development goals. Because if climate change is only addressed as a standalone, it means then that the effects of the realization of SDGs that have already been realized will be negated, because climate change is affecting education, climate change is affecting health, it is affecting accessibility of clean energy. And you will see that in some of the clips that I'm going to show you, how climate change is actually even affecting all sustainability and even infrastructure. Next slide, please. So you can see that in climate change, when you talk about climate change and migration, it has affected not only human beings, you're also talking about even wildlife. They are migrating. The original habitat that wildlife used to have, to live in, they are also moving because they're in search of food, they're in search of water. And therefore it means that there will be increase in wildlife and conflict. You know, also even the vectors, the disease causing insects, the vectors like malaria, where there was no malaria initially. Now we are finding that malaria is becoming rampant and even moving to other countries and other places where initially there was no incidences of malaria. And just this year alone, at the beginning of the year, we had locust invasion. Next slide. As you can see, these are some of the pictorial slides that are just depicting what is currently going on. From the slide, you can see that is the livelihoods of people being affected. So again, what the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal, is talking about is in terms of provision of economic empowerment. You can see that is the shop on the left side that is greatly affected because of floods. And this is happening actually currently in real time in Kenya. Next slide. So again, look at the infrastructure and the sustainability of infrastructure because of climate change, because of floods, that even the road networks are being affected, houses, buildings. So that is the reason why I'm saying, next slide. That is the reason why, please, next slide. That is the reason why I'm saying that there is need to address climate change and to be mainstreamed in all levels of sustainable development goals. This is currently what is going on the left side, where again floods have greatly affected even food crop. And next slide, that is what happened a couple of years ago during drought session, whereby many people actually lost their livestock. Again, as I mentioned, the climate change is also affecting access to clean water and sanitation. On the left, during drought, that is the same water well, people are not able to access. At the same time, they're able to, whenever there is flood, the water, they collect water that is dirty, that is already exposed to E. coli. Next slide, please. So again, migration is affecting, whenever there is migration, we are saying that there's a lot of environmental degradation. Move on to the next slide. There's a lot of environmental degradation whereby trees are cut down because people have to eat, they have to provide firewood. Next slide. And they also have to put up temporary shelters so that they can access temporary shelter. Just move on to the next slide. So this is what happened at the end in Zimbabwe, whereby there was human and wildlife conflict. And you can see on the left where an elephant tried to access a water well and it got stuck. Again, it causes conflict. And the other side is some of the wild animals that actually died. Next slide, please. So that is a pictorial example of a locust invasion that happened. And so therefore, as I mentioned earlier, that even locusts are migrating, human beings are migrating, wildlife are migrating. Next slide. So we are saying that as individuals and as group, we need to address climate change because it will increase conflict. It will also increase conflict between human and wildlife. It also increases loss of livelihood and even diseases. And there are other intangible things that I mentioned about, for example, like human rights abuse. Next slide. So we are calling upon you as Africa Climate Action Initiative that as individuals and even as organizations, let us increase awareness and in terms of both to individuals, let us change the way we do things. Let us change even the way we are producing things. And we also inviting you to come and partner with Africa Climate Action Initiative in terms of either volunteering and giving us your skills, or at the same time, you can join our website that will be indicated there and join a bikeathon event that we are doing fundraising that has been shown in the next slide, please, so that you can come and be part of the change that we want to see. So all skills, next slide, please. All skills are invited in terms of volunteer, and also at the same time, we also need you to help fundraise. As Lynn also mentioned, there are people who are looking forward in terms of raising and even partnering with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you for reminding us that the climate crisis is a human rights crisis and is going to be even more so in the next few years, in the next decades. More than ever, acting on climate now is going to reduce future suffering. So if you're just joining us now, welcome to the launch of the Africa Climate Action Initiative. Please try to find us on Twitter or Instagram to stay in touch with us, stay in touch with our different speakers, and learn more about what you can do to be part of the change, as Sarah mentioned. I'm very happy and honored to introduce you to our next speaker, Dr. Asume Osuoka. Joining us, he is the director of Social Action International. It's an organization promoting resource democracy, climate justice, human rights, and livelihoods of marginalized communities in West and Central Africa. Social Action is leading advocacy about the links of climate change and impoverishment, displacement, and conflict in the Lake Chad Basin, and supports the integration of emergency responses and climate change adaptation measures. Osuoka previously served as coordinator of Oil Watch Africa, a network of organizations supporting communities impacted by the petroleum industry in the continent. He has participated in several international conferences, has even been on as a panelist at the United Nations Experts Group meeting on the use of non-renewable resource revenues for sustainable local development. He holds a doctorate in environmental studies from York University, not far from Toronto, and he is now a member of faculty there and a visiting scholar. Asume, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Lynn. And thank you to the Africa Climate Action Initiative for giving me the privilege to participate in this official launch today. I hope that you are all keeping safe wherever you are in this challenging period. I want to talk about the impact of climate change on conflict in the Lake Chad region of West Africa. I'll be talking about an area where, even as Sarah pointed out in her presentation, that people here are dealing with COVID-19, which is compounding an already perilous situation. communities in the Sahel region of West Africa have been impacted by conflicts that have arisen because of the competition for resources created, the situation that has been created by climate change. Today, as the world is tackling COVID-19 in Nigeria, one of the most impacted places is the city of Kano, which is in the Sahel. The numbers there are rising every day. The deaths are increasing every day. People do not have access to the right medical facilities. In Maiduguri, the largest city in the Lake Chad Basin, we have a situation where even before COVID-19, there were 3 million people that were already displaced because of conflicts that have been caused in part by climate change. In Maiduguri alone, in the Maiduguri area, there are over 1 million people that are living in IDP camps and in host communities, depending on aid for food, for medicine, and other supplies. Today, COVID-19 is spreading within the community, and we can only hope for the best because medical facilities are just not adequate. Now, let us go to the next slide. We see that climate change is causing conflicts over scarce resources. And I'm going to be speaking about the Boko Haram conflict in a short while. What many don't recognize, what many don't know, is that the Boko Haram conflict is caused in part by climate change. There were underlying conditions, ecological conditions, that created impoverishment and displacement even before the Boko Haram conflict. And it is because of these conditions that it made Boko Haram to emerge. Let us go to the next slide. Now, many consider conflict like the Boko Haram conflict as something that is happening far away in Africa. For those in North America, in Canada, what people don't recognize is that climate change and climate change impact have been created by the lifestyle of people in the global north. European and North American emissions have had impact on the Sahel region for a long time. Studies have shown that the droughts of the 1970s and 1980s have been caused by emissions of greenhouse gases and aerosols in North America and Europe. The release of aerosols in the Northern Hemisphere from the 1960s up to the 1980s resulted in atmospheric cooling there and the shifting of the tropical rain band southwards, which caused severe droughts in the Sahel. And when this happened, countries needed to deal with this situation. Next slide. Because of the hunger, in the area from the 1970s and 1980s, international development agencies, including the World Bank, encouraged African countries to build large-scale irrigation projects, dams and irrigation projects. The impact of this project was that even the scarce land was taken away from farming communities to make way for irrigation projects. And irrigation projects spurred land grabbing among the political military elite to the exclusion of poor farmers. And many of those that were pushed away from their farmland to make way for the dams and irrigation projects ended up in the major cities, in the slums of the major cities. And some of the crises that we're seeing, the urban crisis, like the Boko Haram crisis in the Lake Chad Basin, have been caused by the children and the grandchildren of those that were displaced by the 1970s and 1980s dams and irrigation projects. Now, we also see that because of climate change, communities that have traditionally moved their cattle to the south, from the Sahel region to the south, after harvest periods to feed on crops, residues, and to fertilize the land, are moving to the south more and more throughout the famine, even during the famine season, because of the ecological pressures created by climate change. And when pastoralists move and encounter farming communities, cattle sometimes destroy crops. And this reality creates anger and conflict between farming communities and pastoralists. And this conflict has resulted in wars in several communities all over West Africa. Nigeria is a very bad case where thousands of people have been killed, whole communities have been destroyed, people massacred because of those conflicts. In Mali, we're seeing similar situations in countries like Burkina Faso, even in Ghana, where there have been records of such conflicts. And the reality is that with climate change continuing, that if action is not taken to have proper adaptation measures, that this conflict will continue. Next slide, please. I've already talked about the dams and the development projects, which even from the 1980s started generating insurgencies. There were peasant uprisings in 1980 in Bakalori, in Kano, in Sokoto in Nigeria, the Masatine uprising in Kano, also in the 1980s, because of displacements that were caused by the building of huge dams and irrigation infrastructure. However, during the period, and even as we see with the Boko Haram insurgency right now, those uprisings were not explained as ecological crisis. The narrative that is dominant is that of religious conflict. So when such uprisings occur, it is because most of the people that have led this uprising in the past have tended to be Islamic clerics. It is easy to label those uprisings as religious disturbances without having an understanding of the underlying conditions that created the impoverishment, the mass impoverishment that caused these uprisings in the first place. In the same way that we saw with the peasant revolts in 1980 in Bakalori, in Masatine, we are seeing the same situation in the Lake Chad Basin from about 10 years ago. Next slide, please. So now, what has been the impact of climate change on the Lake Chad Basin? This is an area that is one of the most impacted in the world, that ongoing impact of climate change. Even as a Nigerian living in the South, we had no idea of the enormous impact of climate change in the Sahel area and in the Lake Chad region in particular. But what we have seen now is that from the 1960s to now, about 90% of the Lake Chad was lost. And the Lake Chad Basin used to be one of the most important freshwater sources, particularly in the semi-arid region and the Lake Chad, the waters of the Lake Chad was used by fishermen from Chad, from Niger Republic, from Cameroon and Nigeria. And it is estimated that about 20 million people depended on their livelihoods from the Lake Chad basin, either as fishers, either as traders, or even people that engage in agriculture, in the floodplains of the Lake Chad basin. But now the Lake Chad is almost completely dried up, and that has had severe impacts on livelihood. It is the situation of unemployment, mass impoverishment in that area as a result of the ecological changes caused by climate change that created the conditions for the Boko Haram conflict. Because you have a lot of young men in particular who are disillusioned, who are frustrated because of lack of livelihood, because of lack of employment. And these people are easily recruited by Islamists, using the kind of ideology that they know to preach against the government. And what has happened, next slide please, is that the crisis, the Boko Haram crisis, the war and insurgency has resulted in the killing of over 20,000 people during the past 10 years, and the displacement of over 3 million people. In fact, in the Lake Chad Basin area, in the 4 countries, there are about 7 million people that are dependent on aid or need some form of assistance or the other for survival. And what we're having is that the COVID-19 situation is compounding an already bad situation. Next slide. Can we have the next slide? The next slide, please. If you go to Maiduguri, the areas around Maiduguri, just moving around the community, you see communities that have been completely destroyed. The entire Borno, apart from Maiduguri's town, almost the whole of Borno state have been destroyed by the Boko Haram insurgents. There are millions of children that are in danger of starvation, and because of climate change and conflicts related to climate change, and the COVID-19 situation compounds their situation. And what I have not mentioned enough is the impact on women. Everybody, you may have heard about the Chibok girls that have been abducted by the Boko Haram insurgents, the Dapchi girls. Beyond the Chibok girls, there are thousands of girls that have been adopted and forced into sex slavery, forced marriages. Women have been raped. Women have been widowed. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of women have been widowed because of the conflicts, and they're living in refugee camps under states of destitution. And we have a situation where there's an urgent need. There's an urgent need to respond not only to the immediate humanitarian needs of the people, but the responses. We have to understand that while the people have immediate need for food, immediate need for medicine, immediate need for shelter, and it's also important to address the underlying ecological conditions that created the impoverishment and conflict in the area in the first place. And that is where climate change adaptation becomes key. Let us go to the next slide as we conclude. So what we're suggesting, and in the spirit of the Africa Climate Action Initiative, is the need to continue to build awareness, the need to promote solidarity and collaboration among people in Africa and the global north, solidarity that is based on a common understanding of the issues that we're confronted. We need to understand the need to support women during climate change adaptation. We need to understand the need to invest in alternative energy, to provide access to alternative energy for the most vulnerable people, and that will need different kinds of investments, small scale and larger scale investments. I also need to address food security through ecological means that will be developed based on that informed by the participation and needs of the beneficiaries themselves. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this.
Thank you very much, Asume. Thank you. I did not know the link between the Boko Haram conflicts and climate change. So thank you for bringing that new narrative to us. It's not one we hear in the media, and I think it was new for a lot of people watching. So thank you very much for sharing. Folks, while we are here, I want to thank you for already having donations trickling in. I said at the beginning that the first $500 donated would be matched, and obviously we would love more funds than that. And already $200 have been donated in the past hour or so. So thank you very much for your generosity, and thank you for being with us tonight. As both Sarah and Asume have showed, those sustainable development goals that we hear a lot, and the concept of sustainable development means that there's a big tie between climate change and those other ones like women's rights and women's empowerment. And we have two wonderful speakers, Vanessa Lanteigne and Oyeyinka Oyelowo from the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, that are going to tell you about this. So first we'll have Vanessa, who's worked in a variety of nonprofits after completing her studies at the University of Victoria in political science. She was in Tanzania, where she worked at a children's rights organization whose main areas were to improve gender equality by preventing child marriage, unwanted teenage pregnancy, and female genital mutilation. Sorry about that. In Ghana, she trained over 1,000 youth in employment and entrepreneurship programs, and helped roll out the first innovation fund, which was then replicated in 5 other countries to give entrepreneurs seed capital. In Canada, she has worked and volunteered with multiple organizations in the environmental, political, and youth education field. Vanessa, thank you for being with us today.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Ali, for the intro. Great to see you, and thank you, ACAI, for spearheading this incredibly important initiative. My name is Vanessa Lanteigne, and I'm the National Coordinator for the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. I'm also with a member of the National Board, Oyeyinka Oyelowo, who will speak after me on the same topic, the impacts of climate change on women's empowerment and the education of girls. Slide, please. So here we are, and next slide, please. So with my short time, I will talk about the challenges I saw as a Canadian and working in Tanzania at the Children's Dignity Forum, whose main goals are to prevent teenage pregnancy and early and forced child marriage, and female genital cutting and mutilation. And there's a picture of myself and my lovely coworkers. Next slide, please. So there is a direct link between the health of the environment and women's empowerment, and this is not groundbreaking news. Wangari Maathai, the founder of the Green Belt Movement and Nobel Peace Prize winner, knew this before I was even born and mobilized over 900,000 women to plant 30 million trees. She said, poor people will cut the last tree to cook the last meal, and that the more you degrade the environment, the more you dig deeper into poverty. And when we degrade our air with carbon emissions, the pollution is not localized, it affects everyone. Wangari Maathai knew the importance of nature as a buffer from extreme poverty. The less money and nature a family has, the less likely a girl is going to go to school, which is proven to be critical to female empowerment. Education has a direct causal link between how many children a woman will have, improves child spacing, and better community health indicators overall. Next slide, please. So at the Children's Dignity Forum, we focused on girls' empowerment in a rural setting. So let's imagine ourselves in Tanzania. In East Africa, around 2/3 of us are employed in agriculture, and around 75% of those farmers are female. With these two statistics, you can already see the link between the health of the environment and women's empowerment. So while I was there in 2016, they had a terrible drought with rolling electricity blackouts because power came from hydroelectric dams. Rain is not only falling less, but it is more unpredictable, which increases the workload on women and girls who are usually responsible for water and will have to walk farther for it to complete household chores like cooking and washing, only adding to their time and energy poverty. Climate change will affect their ability to go to school, become financially independent, and have the power of making choices over their lives, especially with regards to sexual reproductive health rights. And I'll tell you why in the next slide, please. So there are hard choices for Tanzanian families. If you are a farmer and there has been little rain, the rivers and soil have dried out, and there's not a produce surplus, ultimately no money will be raised. Girls will be taken out of school because it is just too expensive, and the family requires more labor input to improve crop yields. Families must find other scarce sources of income. So males are expected to be the breadwinners, and their education is prioritized to attract a wife who will then live with him or the family. Unfortunately, it is not economically advantageous to invest money into a girl's education because she leaves to live with her husband's family and become part of their lineage. So there is an economic incentive to marry girl children, which is called bride price, which this includes valuables that the bride's family can eat, use, or sell. And if a family is struggling with extreme poverty, parents may marry their children early for survival. Before marriage, some parents of all religious beliefs, including Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, will have the genitalia of their girl children cut to preserve their purity and as a rite of passage to become a woman, sometimes as early as 12 years old. So often done at a time called the cutting season by a designated cutter. In Swahili, she is called the Ngariba. A paradox of this work is that our main objective is empowering women and girls, but to do this, it is taking away a well-paying female job. So it is so important for a girl to finish her education, but the perception is that if you are a mother, pregnant, or married, you should not be in school. So as you can see with those statistics, that narrows the opportunity for the education of so many girls, which will only get worse with climate change. Next slide, please. So climate change will push more families into extreme poverty and result in the sacrifice of girl children's education, rights, and freedoms by having them cut, forced to marry or marry early, resulting in teenage pregnancy and continuing the poverty cycle. So despite these challenges, I really want to highlight the resilience and strength of women and girls and the love I witnessed within Tanzanian families and communities, but also how important it is to control our own pollution and support climate change mitigation and investment in Africa for sustainable jobs and energy, and how closely it is connected to women's empowerment and the education of girls. Final slide, please. So thank you so much, everyone. And I will now hand it over to my wonderful board member, Oyeyinka, to talk more about solutions.
Thank you, Vanessa, for providing that in-depth analysis.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm gonna introduce you to Oyeyinka, and I want to just highlight that our supporters joining us now, we're kind of putting the links between climate change and women empowerment with representatives from Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. So Oyeyinka is a human rights lawyer advocating to help individual access to justice and fight injustice at work. She has a penchant for effective advocacy, using all her skills, knowledge, and experience to advocate for workers' legal protection and other interests. She has worked with the Ontario Justice Education Network and developed, coordinated, and delivered justice education information and programs to students and others. Oyeyinka continues to be involved in social security initiatives and currently sits on the board of the directors of the Voice of Women for Peace. Thank you, Oyeyinka, for being with us today.
Thank you, Ali. And thank you again, Vanessa, for providing an in-depth analysis of the difficult choices families must deal with due to the impact of climate change on women in Tanzanian communities. My name is Oyeyinka Oyelowo, and I am a national board member for the Voice of Women for Peace. And I'm also a human rights lawyer practicing at Franklin Law in Toronto, Ontario. My presentation focuses on the research-based solutions that we can create by educating African women and communities about how to manage the devastating effects of climate change. First, I will examine qualitative and quantitative research highlighting the negative macroeconomic impacts of climate change and the consequent burden on public education, peace, and security. Next slide, please. Agriculture in developing countries across Africa and the Middle East suffer immensely from increases in temperature. For example, Africa's slow economic growth in the 1980s and in the 1990s has been linked to historically low precipitation. Communities that rely on agriculture as their main source of livelihood are vulnerable to poverty and famine. And one recent example that has shocked the world are the massive swarms of locusts and severe floods threatening East Africa's food supply. Next slide, please. Academic research shows that by the year 2050, African countries will sustain a permanent temperature increase of approximately 2 degrees Celsius to 5 degrees Celsius. We need to translate this research into action because the World Health Organization has highlighted that educating women is a lifeline to development and sustainable development. For example, educating African women about what crops survive in specific temperatures will have a direct impact on access to food, health, safety, and mortality rates in relation to poverty. The current global response to the threat of climate change is insufficient because there is no clear plan as to how green climate action funds will directly impact communities in Africa. Next slide, please. A Harvard University research paper called Temperature Test Scores in Human Capital Production indicates that heat exposure affects educational performance in both the short and long run. So taking an exam on a 90-degree Fahrenheit day relative to a 72-degree Fahrenheit day results in a reduction in exam performance. It also results in a reduction in human capital production in terms of agriculture. Next slide, please. Peace and security is also threatened by temperature increases, which directly affect the lives of women. Studies have shown that an increase in violence correlates with higher temperatures. For example, in Tanzania, a study from 2005 showed that temperature increases resulted in an increase in witch murders, which is specifically violence against women. Next slide. So gender inequalities are actually exacerbated by violence correlated with the negative consequences of climate change. At the village level, there are higher instances of violence against women due to poverty and lack of access to food and income. At the regional level, a 1990 study shows that the higher temperatures resulted in more riots and battles across East Africa. And at the country level, higher temperatures have resulted in increased civil war risk across sub-Saharan Africa. Next slide, please. In order to build resilient African communities that can stand the changes, the negative impacts of climate change, the key path for improved climate action is to educate women about how to deal with climate changes resulting in loss of food, security, and educational opportunities. When we invest in women's education about climate change, we invest in the health and safety of African communities. So how do we build a sustainable and resilient African community focused on education, health, and the well-being of all Africans amidst rapid climate change? The key pathways for improved climate change adaptation in Africa include investing in affordable and effective interventions to reduce the burden of mortality and disability. So like I've mentioned before, educating women on which crops can withstand the changes in temperature. Our goal is to reduce the burden of mortality and disability by empowering women with access to information. Empowering women through education is a powerful way to combat climate change. So I want to appeal to you today to please donate to the African Climate Action Initiative to help fight fight climate change in African communities by educating and empowering women to build sustainable communities in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yinka, for that. This was very inspiring and insightful at the same time. I apologize if you can hear my neighbors honking in the back. I'm assuming they're honking for climate justice, but in all cases, if you can hear it, I'm sorry. I want to thank our speakers again for showing us that if you identify as a feminist, as a children's rights advocate, as a human rights advocate, you should be taking responsibility for the climate crisis, and especially in a country like Canada, where our emissions per capita are huge, but are having consequences elsewhere. And I think some of you are taking that very seriously because donations are coming in. We are now at about $475. That is huge. That is so close to the $500 we would like to match. So thank you so much. Keep them coming. The link is in the YouTube chat box. as we've mentioned already, we are working with partners on the ground during this fundraiser. Some of the countries are already set up, some of the initiatives, sorry. I'm in Ghana, in Gabon, in Kenya, in South Sudan, in Somalia, and in Tanzania. And it is now my huge honor to introduce you to our performer for this evening. And I hope you'll be reacting on Twitter or on Instagram. But we are going to introduce you to Emmanuel Jal. Now, you might already know Emmanuel, but if not, I will remind you a little bit of who he is. Emmanuel Jal's story, his message, and his performance is one of resilience and the power of the human spirit to show how change and a better future are possible. Emmanuel started his life as a child soldier in the war-torn region of southern Sudan in the early 1980s. He was eventually rescued by a British aid worker and brought to Kenya, where he overcame a huge number of struggles to become a successful and acclaimed recording artist and peace ambassador. He's now based in Toronto in Canada, and he has released 6 award-nominated studio albums and has collaborated and performed alongside Lauryn Hill, Xavier Rude, Peter Gabriel, Nelly Furtado, Ed Sheeran, Alicia Keys, and many more. Emmanuel speaks and performs from high-level forums to school classrooms about reconciliation and peace. He co-starred with Reese Witherspoon in the motion picture The Good Lie, is a recipient of the Václav Havel International Prize for Creative Dissent in 2018, the Desmond Tutu Reconciliation Award in 2017, the Hunt Humanitarian Award, and many others. Emmanuel is also the creator of Jalgua, the founder of Gua Africa charity which supports Southern Sudanese refugees youth education. And he is the creator and director of My Life is Art. Emmanuel, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Making me part of this amazing event. So I'm just gonna begin with a small story and then we can perform. You guys are gonna be jumping around with, I know you guys are there, so I'm gonna ask you guys so we can dance together. So what I know is there's different method all over the world to catch a monkey. And so usually in Africa, you could have a huge gourd and you put nuts inside it, or you put something, or pretend you're eating that, because monkeys observe humans, how humans do things. And then how they do it, you make it like so tiny so that if the monkey put the hand inside and grab everything in, it will not be able to pull it out. And so you leave. And then now when you come, you make sure you tie that gourd on something, or maybe whatever it is, it could be a hive, a beehive, or whatever it is you have made, and put your nuts inside. And so the monkey will come and put the hand in, and then you can come screaming at the monkey. The monkey hold the nuts and close the hand so tight. It doesn't want to let the nuts go. You can whip that monkey as you want, but the monkey won't let the nuts go. And that's how they normally catch a monkey alive. And you could put whatever you want to put in the rock. They don't want to let the nuts go. And so when I look at it, that's how human beings are. We've built a system that all of us are part of it. You know, it's so destructive. The climate change, we have plastics in the ocean, we're polluting the air, then we have our mobile phones, everything that we're introducing, we're bringing, it's harming the environment. But we like it. We like our internet, we like our cars, we like our planes, we like everything. And then here we start saying this is bad. Even though we're feeling the pain, we're just like that monkey, which is holding the nut until it's done. And so I'm looking at it this way is also for Africa. I mean, what can we let go so that we can let our mind think and we can prepare and adapt? Then all the time, the rest of the world, we are always, every problem, we are always asking for money. So I just want to leave that question out there for you who are listening. And also, how do we not make people who are supporting to be drained? And also for those who are always donating, what is it that each one of us can do to actually adapt, but also leave this land for the children to come. What are those kids gonna say in the future? What the question are they gonna ask? Dad, what did you do? Auntie, what did you do? You know, you're growing old and you're watching the world, we're living it worse than when we found it. So how can we make this world better than when we found it for those ones ahead? And so I'm gonna do a song right now. So I wanna ask you if you can see me, you know? Do you guys mind? Whatever you are, you can stand up and let's have fun. So I'm gonna do We Want Peace right now. And if you guys wanna enjoy it, so let's do this. And here we go. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I'm looking for some people who's looking for peace. Maybe together we can make the world cease. Send mankind to the moon. We can reach to the bottom of the sea. That's why it's really kind of baffles me that we cannot end wars and bring peace. We cannot change the way people act. We cannot change the way people think. So we sit back, chill out and relax. Civilization will soon be extinct. That's why I am. I'm calling on the whole wide world. Come on, people, would you help me? Let's scream and shout, because we want peace, yeah. To say the least, I dedicate this song to the common people caught in the middle of this common evil. I wish the world was a little bit fairer. Time is start looking at the man in the middle. Feast their policeman. Fear me, good German side with that so he can build above genocide, havoc was wreaking. Silent of the lamb, because nobody was speaking. That's why I am. I'm calling on the whole wide world. Come on, people, would you help me? Let's scream and shout, because we want peace, yo. To say the least, somebody said after Rwanda. And after Rwanda, not far from Rwanda, who's gonna shout for the poor people living in Darfur? The world gone deaf, the world gone blind, the world busy sitting down on their behind. Nobody cared about the poor and needy, too busy sucking up to the rich and the greedy. For every hero there's a villain, I ain't kidding. We're gonna shout, sending up or sitting. One more time, we got no more time. We gotta figure out the way that we could all combine. Like Jericho, the world comes tumbling down, the sound of voices out of the city surround. You know what it's worth now. Time to put a voice to work. We gotta shut down heaven and earth. That's why I am. I'm calling on the whole wide world. Come on, people, would you help me? Let's scream and shout, because we want peace, yo. To say the least, come on, everybody, come on. Come on, everybody, come on. Come on, everybody, come on. Come on, Oyeyinka, come on. Come on, Ali, come on. Come on, Sarah, come on. Hands up, hands up. Come on, Vanessa, come on. Come on, come on, Asume, come on. Hands up. Come on, everybody, come on. Come on, Claire, come on. Come on, Surveyor, come on. Come on, Paul, Steve, come on. Come on, Katie, come on. We want peace. We are gonna get it. We're gonna get it. We're gonna get it. Come on, Kwame, come on. Come on, Sharon, come on. We want peace. Yeah, we want peace. We are gonna get it. We're gonna get it. We're gonna get it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would be lying if I said I wasn't dancing, but I obviously had to shut down my screen for that. You don't have to see that, but thank you so much, Emmanuel. That was so energizing, so hopeful, and I hope everybody there felt like they could take meaningful action on climate with all this energy that Emmanuel gave us. Thank you so much. We're gonna go back to some powerful speakers, some concrete actions with our next speaker, Surveyor Efik. Surveyor is an environmentalist and a climate change specialist with experience of well over 10 years as former national coordinator of the Climate Change Network Nigeria. It's a national civil society coalition in Nigeria. He is a fellow at the Center for Development Innovation of the Wageningen University and the Research in the Netherlands. He is a fellow at the Diplo Foundation Institute, the Climate Action Network International, and the UN Habitat World Urban Campaign. Efik has served on many civil society representative bodies at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, at the National Interministerial Committee on Climate Change, and more recently at the National Technical Committee of REDD, that's for forest conservation. He is a renowned speaker on various issues of climate change, including on the 64th annual UNDP conference in Bonn, Germany. Surveyor, thank you for being with us tonight and for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the amazing introduction. And I thank the organizers, the CAP Network, and African Climate Action Initiative for this beautiful launch of this program. Thank you very much. My next slide, please. My topic is on the reality of climate change impacts in West Africa with the food insecurity perspective. Next slide, please. Yeah. Next slide, please, too. I'm going to take you guys to the impact, the areas that, the impacts that climate change actually covers. Global climate change is recognized as a critical phenomenon with strong implications for socio-ecological, biophysical, and human systems, and consequently human development. The impact of climate change is evident on areas such as agriculture, fisheries, energy, water, human health, food security, biodiversity, and ecosystem services. Industry also is impacted, human settlements are impacted, and the occurrence of natural disasters. But I'm going to focus on food security. So that next slide, please. What areas do we understand to mean by food security? Some research has made us understand that potential impacts of climate change on vulnerability to food security include both direct nutritional effects, that is changes in consumption quantities and composition, the quality of food we eat, and then livelihood effects, which is changes in employment opportunities and the cost of acquiring adequate nutrition. So this is the scope of what we mean by food insecurity as impacted by climate change. Then there's some researches that made us understand that West Africa is one of the most food insecure regions of the world. And from the presentations of my colleagues who have spoken before me, you could get to understand that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change further said that warming global temperatures are likely to reduce West African agricultural production by up to 50% by the year 2020. And we are in 2020 right now. You can see that the impact of food security caused by climate change has gone up so drastically. Next slide, please. And so it's a timely intervention by cabinet is launched together to raise funds to support African communities. I'm going to take you through the impact for we to really understand why this support or this launch is very, very critical. Look at Nigerian map, the physical map of Nigeria. You see the northern region of Nigeria is the arid region, the dry lands. And then the southern part is the lowlands, or we can say wet regions also. Then in the north, you can find decreased precipitation, which is decrease in rainfall patterns. You can observe and experience drought. You can observe and experience desert encroachment. In the south, which is the lowlands, you can see increase in precipitation. That's the rainfall patterns. You can also see floods and you can see sea level rise. Next slide, please. These futures reflects across West Africa. So the way you're seeing Nigeria, that's how it spreads around the northern part of West Africa and the southern part of West Africa. Now I'm going to take you some other evidence-based scenarios that we observed in Nigeria and as we also see across West Africa. Look at the picture of Abuja atmosphere. It's clear. No industries is located in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria. But you come to the commercial headquarters of Nigeria, which is Lagos City, where the atmosphere is very brownish and dusty due to industrial pollution. These are the things that causes climate change, and these are the things that also skyrocket the impacts of climate change among the people. And look at deforestation going on. And then look at the lake chart, which my colleague Isaac spoke about initially. In 1963, we can see the size of Lake Chad, which used to be a hub, an agricultural hub those days in Africa, or in West Africa specifically. It was full. The water there is very full, very, very full. And it was a source of domestic water, the source of water for agriculture and food production. In 1973, it got reduced. In 1987, it got reduced to just few patches. In 1997, we saw just 3 patches around, patches of water, I mean. Then in 2001, just 1 patch of water. In present time, it's completely dry and full of sand. It's dry, no water again. That means no agricultural activities going on in that region, in the Lake Chad region. And so it is in other parts of the northern region of West Africa. Please, next slide. So you can see that the impact of climate change is eating into the northern region of Nigeria, while sea level rise and flood is also eating deep into the landmass of Nigeria in the south. And so we just have the middle belt to struggle the resources with. Look at Yobe State in the northern part of Nigeria, where the desert encroachment has engulfed a whole community. And those communities will relocate from the north and come down to the south. Look at biodiversity loss. The whole land is laying dry and empty. And then you come to the side, you see flooding, see women struggling with their properties. See the sea level rise. That's why I name it sight and scenes of climate change impacts. Next slide, please. Now, this is another aspect that is also exacerbating the impact of food security in Nigeria, the oil and gas sector in Nigeria, where we have the oil spillage on the land, where we have the gas flaring in the air, meaning that the water, the land, and the air are seriously polluted. In the Niger Delta, environmental degradation has led to a substantial decline in local food production. That is a fact. This has contributed to scarcity and an astronomical increase in the price of food, placing it beyond the reach of a vast majority of the local people. The consumption patterns and quality of food consumed are equally vital, with most local people lacking access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food for their dietary needs. This is exactly what is happening across West Africa and across the Niger Delta, the oil and gas region of Nigeria, comprising about 9 states. If you see the map of Nigeria up there, those 9 states are what we refer to as the oil-producing Niger Delta region. Next slide, please. Now, having looked at the impacts across Nigeria, I'm showing you now the impacts in the futures in West Africa. The northern part of West Africa is still the arid region. The southern part of West Africa is the lowland region. Now, food security remains a major structural problem in the economic community of West African states. That is ECOWAS, comprising about 15 states across the West African sub-region. Out of its 308 million inhabitants, 40 million people are undernourished and suffer from chronic malnutrition, which you have seen my previous speakers and colleagues have mentioned. Every year, food crises affect additional millions of people. Next slide, please. This is exactly what we're experiencing as a result of impact of climate change, because the lands are no longer fertile to farm. And then the water, the flood has also killed a lot of farm crops. And so the traditional occupation of the people, which has been farming and fishing, is no longer, is eroded away, is no longer there, is impacted by climate change. And so they begin to look for alternative livelihoods which are not found. and which is the essence of this launch, so that we can send some support in terms of alternative livelihoods to them. Now I'm showing you another scope, the West Africa's food security outlook in 2018. Please take a look at the yellow patches, which is the phase two, which is stressed condition of food security. Now look at the brown patches, is the phase 3, which is crisis situation of food insecurity. Now look at, you can see just few yellow patches, which means few areas are stressed. There's a grayish area around the southern part of Nigeria, means that there were no data analyzed. So that's why it's like that. So the areas you see that are bluish are minimal area, and data were all analyzed there. So some 4.5 million people in the Sahel and West Africa were in need of assistance during the period from October to December 2018. About 182,000 people required emergency assistance in Nigeria, Mali, the Gambia, Mauritania, Niger, and Chad. If appropriate measures are not taken, nearly 8.9 million people, including 4.5 million in Nigeria alone, could be affected by June to August 2019. Please, next slide. Let's see the outlook in 2019 and the situation. You can see a lot of yellow patches, which means a lot of stressed situation. You can see a large portion of brown patches, which means a lot of crisis situation. The yellow and the brownish have taken over the minimal portion. And so you can see that in 2019, which was just last year, the situation in West Africa is very daring. Most areas will remain in minimal phase 1 food insecurity until May 2020, and some will remain in stressed phase 2. The primary country is Mali, other countries, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal. These are real critical situations. Please, next slide. And then another exacerbation factor is the COVID-19, which we have all heard from our previous speaker. I'm not going to dwell much on that. It shows that this has also impacted on the food security situation in West Africa. Next slide, please. Armed conflict, which Isaac also spoke about, is another exacerbating factor, which has also led to food insecurity situation to be in a stressed proportion and also in crisis proportion. So I'm not going to dwell much on that again because of time. Conflict intensity, I just want to let you know that conflict intensity measured by number of fatalities increases number of days where the household had to rely on less preferred foods, limit the variety of foods eaten, limit the portion size of meals consumed is very, very critical. Next slide, please. This, I just want to mention this for you to know what we have been doing. This is the traditional mode of cooking, which is wood fuel. Using wood fuel, that's firewood, to cook. This is what is experienced across the West African sub-region. Traditional fuel for cooking is this. And now, because of deforestation and climate change impact, lack of access to clean source of food production is not there in terms of using clean energy sources for cooking. We need that. Lack of sustainable agricultural practices or climate smart agriculture, the practice is not there. That should be done too. Lack of alternative livelihoods apart from farming and fishing is no longer there. But in Climate Change Network, comprising of about 160 diverse nonprofits and civil society groups, we've been doing a lot. Next slide, please, to support before now. Now, this particular code is the driver that will send all of us to support this African Climate Action Initiative. What is it about? Say, if these vulnerable groups, farmers and livestock farmers and other dependent on climate and natural resources, do not receive outside aid to help them adapt, the socioeconomic and cultural systems that underlie rural and even urban communities in West Africa could be eroded or completely destroyed. This was a research report in 2009. And since then, we've swung into action to make sure that we reduce the impact in the area of food insecurity in Nigeria and by extension, West Africa. Access to clean fuel for food production. We devised what we call Save 80 stove. It's a clean energy stove, that's it in the next slide. As the name implies, cooking with the Save 80 stove Save 80 saves 80% of the wood consumption compared to the traditional open fireplace. With just few pieces of sticks on the ground, you can cook a large meal for a large family. The Save 80 needs just about 250 grams of wood to prepare a delicious pot of jollof rice that can feed 15 people. This is commonly being circulated in Nigeria right now. With this, I'm going to show you how it is being operated. And in 2009, when we're preparing to go for the United Nations Summit on Climate Change in Copenhagen, we organized a national conference, and we used this device. We used this Save 80 stove to cook within the hotel premises that we used and serve the food to all the participants that attended the meeting. We also have what we call the Wonder Box. It's probably like rice. You can just parboil the rice and then bring it from the stove and put it in the Wonder Box and cover it. The heat there will make the rice to done without using firewood. These are some of the things we have done. Some other members of the network, like I told you, is a very big network in Nigeria, like the Better Living Foundation. They've been doing a lot in terms of sustainable agriculture, like Women Environmental Program. They've been doing a lot in terms of sustainable agriculture, like Young Brains Initiative. They've been doing a lot on this agricultural part of it, because food insecurity is very critical in this West African sub-region. We have Olumide Ido, who has also been doing a lot in the area of recycling, and we have African Cleanup Initiative that has been doing recyclers pay. Women are called upon to pick some plastics on the streets and bring them, and then they will be paid. And that money is used to support their children's school fees. It's paid directly to their children's schools. So in this case, the poverty level has been reduced. These are the activities that some of our members have been doing. This is another picture of the Save 80 stove, whereby families are using it to cook right now in Nigeria. And so we need support to escalate it to West African sub-region. And so other recommendation, because time is of essence, African Climate Action Initiative through CAP Network should consider the establishment of a bottom-up multi-stakeholder and multi-institutional participatory platform for information sharing in Africa, capacity building and skills outreach, as in from Canada to Africa and Africa to Canada, because of the support we're trying to muster to support activities, climate mitigation and adaptation in West Africa, and by extension, Africa as a whole. We need to encourage the use of renewable energy and clean energy sources in West Africa, like using the solar cook stove, another mode of clean cook stove for cooking in Nigeria. Empowering women to establish cottage industries will also be another way of giving them alternative livelihoods, because most women they can't farm and they can not also fish. Then the use I've mentioned about the use of wood. We should continue to organize seminars and sustainable energy. There's one critical aspect I need to mention too, the area of this oil and gas pollution. In 2016, I led a very big campaign called Break Free from Fossil Fuels campaign. We told the Nigerian government to bury the oil in the ground, and let's explore other sources of other natural sources for development, because the oil is like a cost to Nigeria. So let the government bury the oil in the ground. That was another way of telling the government this oil is also contributing to food insecurity. This oil is contributing to the impact of climate change. So what do? Let us bury it in the ground and use other sources and explore other sources for livelihood and for national growth. So that campaign was very critical. It's also a way of pushing further for the promotion of a sustainable food security West Africa and Nigeria. So next slide. Next slide, please. So with this recommendation, okay, next slide. Oh, that's it. So this is where we are for now. Thank you very much. Thank you. I will encourage a lot of our participants to also join the Rickathon of if you have your bike in West Africa, anywhere you are, just subscribe, just ride your bike. I'm sure maybe COVID-19 may not allow you to come out, but this is to show you that this does not pollute the environment. Riding a bike for your activities or to go to work or to go to anywhere will not pollute your environment. So we're trying to promote this campaign. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you for once again establishing the links between food sovereignty and climate, for reminding us that all these UN goals that we've been talking about during the last few decades about food security, they could be canceled if we don't do anything for climate change. And thank you for those of you that are continuing to donate. Reminder that the link is in the chat box on YouTube. You're going to be financing initiatives that are directly on the ground, working on solutions like this wonderful. I love the idea of the oven that you brought to the UN. I think that's great to bring the UN the actual solutions that are working. So thank you so much for pointing that out. And thank you for those of you that are donating right now. Now, I know we've just given you a lot of information on everything that could potentially go wrong, and that's because it's important for us to be informed here in Canada. But now we're going to be listening to very concrete solutions with Katie Fettes, our next speaker, who is the co-founder and the director of communications at the Rainmaker Enterprise. The Rainmaker Enterprise is a nonprofit organization dedicated to implementing climate-smart water infrastructure in regions impacted by conflict and climate change. Katie has a master's degree in conflict, security, and development, and previously worked with the Olive Branch of Children in Tanzania. Welcome, Katie. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Ali. And hi, this is Katie. I'm representing the Rainmaker Enterprise today. I'm so honored to be here with all of you watching, and also all of those speakers and Emmanuel performing. We're so happy to be joining this effort, the Africa Climate Action Initiative. And I just want to tell you a little bit today about a community in South Sudan. The community of Tonge is our partner community that's working hard right now to adapt to the impacts of climate change and build resilience through partnership. So the Rainmaker Enterprise, next slide, please. The Rainmaker Enterprise is an organization working with people impacted not only by climate change, but also by conflict to build resilience through the implementation of solar-powered water infrastructure for health and food security. Next slide, please. So I'm pleased, Surveyor, to be answering your call to use renewable energy for climate-smart agriculture and building food security. Now, South Sudan is one of the top 5 most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change. That's according to the 2017 Climate Change Vulnerability Index. Why is that? That's a combination of reasons. First is because of the direct impacts of climate shocks. So irregular rainfall that's bringing both extreme droughts and extreme flooding and destroying people's crops, displacing hundreds of thousands, and flooding that impacted up to 1 million people last year alone. This is compounded by the high reliance on climate-sensitive sectors of the population, with almost 100%, so up to 95%, depending on farming, fishing, or herding, what we call climate-sensitive sectors. So when a climate shock comes up, this puts people's lives in complete jeopardy, and that's what we've been seeing. Finally, this is combined with the low capacity of the government to respond and with climate shocks because of long-standing political conflict and a chronic humanitarian situation. Now, at the community level, next slide, these vulnerabilities are worsening health challenges, poverty, forced migration, intercommunal conflicts over scarce resources, and extreme food insecurity. This is combined to leave 7 million people extreme food insecure, and that's over half the population. Now, what are we doing about this? Next slide, please. So at the community level, what we found at Rainmaker is that insecurity starts with lack of access to clean water and water scarcity. So how we're responding is by installing climate-smart water infrastructure in rural off-grid communities in South Sudan to provide access to water both for people to drink and use in the household level and to use for farming, to enable communities to adapt to climate change and rebuild resilience and security. So the way that our system works is a solar-powered water pump connected to drip irrigation system, which provides an effective means of accessing and managing water that enables communities to farm not only during the rainy season, which is getting increasingly short and irregular, in fact, all year round. And so it gives a bit of a security in times of uncertainty that we're facing now. Next slide, please. So what we hope by starting at the community level is that practical action creates possibilities and is going to inspire further action. So what we've seen so far is that our community where we've started is starting to inspire surrounding communities, that we can expand our impact by partnering, working together and collaborating. So we start at the community level and we build from the ground up. Next slide, please. We hope this can also inspire people like you listening and tuning in tonight to support this kind of actions along these people who are on the front lines of climate change and who are already fully prepared to adapt, but they do need the tools. So just to give you an example, our team spoke with one of our community members at CORE last year, and that's the one on the left on the slide that you see there. So she shared with us how she comes from a long line of farmers. Farming is what she's born with and what she needs to do. ACOR holds in her hands generations of knowledge on organic farming and sustainable land management, and all the factors I've just outlined here have taken this ability out of her hands. Now, if there's one thing I think the COVID-19 situation has shown, it's actually how important productivity is for human security. It's actually quite essential because when food chains get shut down globally, this puts us all in a situation of insecurity. Now, in South Sudan, many communities have been dealing with this for years and even decades due to conflict and insecurity. We say at the Rainmaker that the critical response is to be able to create the capacity for local level food production. And these challenges are only being compounded now by COVID and also by climate change. So the need for local food production capacity is more important than ever. And that's what we're trying to build by leveraging renewable technology to build resilience. So with the right tools, ACOR can cultivate, move her community forward, be a land steward, take the future back into her hands. And that's not just her community's future, but that's our collective future, the future of our whole global community. So final slide, please. We at Rainmaker are strongly in favor of more of these solar powered irrigation systems and of working together to scale up solar powered irrigation as a response to climate change and food insecurity. And it is growing rapidly across the African continent as a solution. So towards these goals, we're so pleased to be part of the Africa Climate Action Initiative, and we look forward to engaging with all of you to expand our impact for the human security and environmental sustainability of the African continent and of our world. So thank you so much. You can learn more on our website, rainmakerenterprise.org, and we can't wait to hear from you and engage. Thank you.
And the wonderful projects, very concrete projects. So you see there are solutions. And Katie, you also highlighted something that maybe we don't hear all the time about this, what we're living with COVID right now, what it's highlighting about the importance of food security, of health, of community, and how climate chaos could be a way worse version than what we're experiencing. So it's giving us this extra incentive to act on climate now, and especially in the wealthy countries like Canada. I want to thank you for continuing to give and to send your donations. We are now at $845 plus the match that we're going to have. So thank you so much. Those are going to go to organizations on the front lines of climate change. So thank you for your generosity. We are now going to hear about ACAI, so Africa Climate Action Initiatives, and how they focus on policy, education, and capacity building. So we're going to learn more about this from Kwame and Frempong. He's the founder of the Pan-African Center for Climate Policy. And Kwame has done quite a lot of things in his life. He is the founder, as I said, of the Pan-African Center for Climate, but he has also worked for the sorry, I got lost there for a second. He's worked for the government of Ghana Youth and Employment Ministry. His initiative, Kwafa International, has contracts all over the world and provides services in education, consulting, market entry in West Africa, and tourism development. He has a postgraduate certification in public health from the University of Roehampton in London, UK. And he is a serial entrepreneur, a climate solution enthusiast with over 15 years of experience in project management and in educating and training others. So more recently, he's been working on the ULEAD project in Calabar, Cross River State, Nigeria. Kwame, thank you for being with us and sharing more of the concrete actions we can take.
Thank you, Ali, for having me. It's a great honor to be part of this great movement, great network, and again, to be part of this great minds that have fired up to make sure that we take the action of climate change initiative to another level. Can you put me on my slides, please? Yeah, so I'll be looking at policy education, the cornerstone of a sustainable Africa climate change initiative. I believe that when the idea of ACAI came into mind, one of the areas that ACAI was looking at is to how to kind of strengthen policy formulation and policy implementation in Africa, and also how to make sure that education, formal, non-formal, and informal, is mainstreamed in our educational system. Yes, we can talk about all beautiful initiatives, but if we don't have a good educational system, we don't have a good policy, most of the ideas will not have a very sustainable route in Africa. Can you take me to the next slide? Next slide. Next slide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, so Africa is often described as a continent most at risk to the negative effect of climate change. According to the Climate Change Vulnerability Index for 2015, 7 of the 10 countries most at risk from climate change are all from Africa. Next slide. Why? The perceived lack of what? Capacity from Africans and their government to fight climate change. Next slide. Next slide, please. Its impact in Africa. We are looking at impact on agriculture and food, impact on human health, impact on shelter, impact on national security, and impact on vulnerable population. The list goes on and on and on. Next slide, please. So these are some of the proposed solutions that we have to drive ACAI initiative. We are looking at biotechnology. We are looking at research at all levels, policy review, and education at all levels. Next slide, please. We're also looking at the thematic areas for climate change education and consideration, advancing policy, transforming learning and training environment, building capacities of educators and trainers, empowering and mobilizing youth, its core component, accelerating sustainable solutions at all levels. Next slide, please. Again, we are looking at the various channels, and under Article 4, Paragraph 1 of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the parties came up with these thematic areas. For the sake of time, I wouldn't want to go into details, but once the presentation is out there, you might want to go through it. Education, training, and public awareness, and it's very much explained in this document. Next slide, please. Where has this worked? Inside Africa. Ghana added climate change to the curriculum of basic education. In this case, Ghana has trained over 600 primary school teachers on climate change and green economy. The Ghana Education Service introduced climate change into all subjects of new primary school curriculum, particularly science, and that's a huge step. South Africa, through the Keep Cool project, built teachers and school leaders of secondary schools capacities to make climate change education part of the school and classroom practice. Mauritius has about 250,000 students are learning about climate change and environment in their school lessons. And in Kenya, systematic integration of education for sustainable development into the country's educational policies. And in Madagascar, disaster risk reduction mainstreamed into the curriculum. So these are very interesting areas to look at. Again, yes, we still need to improve. Next slide, please. And then go to the next slide, please. The Pan-African Center for Climate Policy. We have a vision to achieve for Africa a cleaner and safer environment in line with the UNFCCC protocols and policies. Climate change policies, creation, training of climate change core, next slide, members across Africa. We work with community-based organizations, government organizations, non-governmental organizations, private practitioners, environmental rights groups, and individual planners. Next slide, please. How are we involved in creating a path towards a regenerative future? These are some of the projects that we've done over the years. Case study in Nigeria, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation in Cross River State, Nigeria. Our approach was using our climate change manual to train volunteers, hosting capacity building workshops for National Youth Service Corps students to help reduce emissions and enhance livelihoods. Next slide, please. And in Cameroon, next slide, please. And in Cameroon, we have the mangrove degraded site in Cameroon. The approach, we've tried to implement educational, again, and awareness raising workshops, distribution of seedlings to farmers within local communities to engage to encourage agroforestry, and setting up a committee to carry out planting of mangrove wildland along the degraded mangrove landscape. Next slide, please. And in Ghana, we developed the Rural Dweller Project. Another Rural Dweller program, we have training volunteers and communities on the use of climate change manual in primary schools. So on the picture there, you see one of our international volunteers from Canada, and Adam Ernst, who is a teacher, was working in Ghana with our local partners to kind of introduce our climate change manual to schools. And we're very happy that the government of Ghana has taken up the initiative to introduce climate change in the educational curriculum at the primary level. And we encourage other countries to do same. Why is climate change education important for policy formulation? The answer is straight up, it's right there. Next slide. It will raise, yes, why is climate change education important for policy formulation? And the answer is straightforward again. It will raise a generation of competent person for effective climate actions. Next slide. So we have the stakeholder involvement. So you look at the various charts, the stakeholder involvement. And we're looking at how hands on decks. Next slide. We have schools, we have researchers, we are looking at politicians, NGOs, activists, local authorities, business sectors, religious bodies, all coming together to have the competent and effective climate change policy and education. And my final class. In conclusion, climate change, first slide, please. In conclusion, climate change is significantly impacting upon the education sector, and education in its broader sense has a critical role to play in response. And let me quote Sir Nicholas Stern, my favorite quote: fostering a shared understanding of the nature of climate change and its consequences is critical in shaping behavior, as well as in underpinning national and international action. Educating those currently at school about climate change will help shape and sustain future policymaking and a broad public and international debate. It also supports today's policymakers in taking strong action now. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kwame. Thank you for mentioning the youth and how important the youth movement is. Obviously, that hit home for me. Folks, we are getting pretty close to our official end time, but we do have two more powerful videos and ideas to share with you. And we've also promised to answer your questions. So I'm going to offer something is that we're going to show you, we're going to have the next speaker show this last video, and then we will have our small ending. But then if you want to stick around for a few more minutes to hear the answers to some of your questions, you're welcome to do so. But let's continue with Paul Stevers, who is a Canadian engineer, an inventor, and the founder of several for-profit and non-profit businesses, including Impacts Incorporated, Biooxidation, and Oxidation Technologies. What motivated Paul to act was after September 11, 2001, when he decided to explore how we could counter violent extremism by combining technologies and renewable resources. And so he's founded a variety of initiatives around that purpose of promoting technology, computer-related products, and renewables to operate in challenging environments, such as Afghanistan and parts of Africa. He is, since 2019, the co-founder of Climate Solutions Advancement Network, SAN, which facilitates investment in climate solutions and creates multimedia campaigns to encourage action on climate change. SAN is supporting the Africa Climate Action Initiative in its efforts to increase food security and education in Africa, especially for girls. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the very nice introduction. And now I've prepared I wanted to pack a lot of information into this, into my session. So I prepared a video for you directly. And so you can play this now and then we can chat afterwards.
Welcome, everyone. We have heard from a range of excellent speakers this evening about how climate change is impacting people across the African continent. In this presentation, I will summarize these impacts and explain how the Africa Climate Action Initiative is a good example of how we can work together to increase food security and education through actions that mitigate or adapt to climate change, and fund it with substantial money that is coming available to finance climate action. Unfortunately, climate change is compounding many existing problems and is resulting in a substantial increase in food insecurity. For example, significant change in weather patterns in Africa is causing many millions of people to become food insecure. This includes severe droughts and floods, as well as an overly wet season can create a whole new set of problems, such as locusts that multiplied into the billions and devastated crops. Unfortunately, climate change is compound. Whether droughts or billions of locusts are causing food shortages, the results are the same. Insufficient food is creating or amplifying many conflicts, which often leads to mass migration. To illustrate the rapid growth of violence in some parts of Africa, here's a short video highlighting the growth of violence in the Sahel and West Africa region between 1997 and 2017. After seeing this video, you may agree that the problems are growing quickly and that significant action insufficient food is creating or amplifying many conflicts, which often leads to the bottom left corner is the year increasing in number. Notice how considerably more violence is shown in countries like Burkina Faso as the year approaches 2017. Fortunately, there is an opportunity to fund substantial action with funding designated for climate action. Therefore, we recommend some of this funding be strategically utilized to increase food security, education, and job creation. For example, hundreds of billions of dollars are now flowing into climate action. At the same time, rapid innovation is reducing the costs of implementing technologies to facilitate food security, such as solar-powered irrigation. as well as there's a substantial growth in free educational information and low-cost digital devices to support education. If this strategy was implemented on a substantial scale, we believe the impact would be very significant. To give you an idea of just how much money is flowing into climate action, shown here are some reports about this funding. In 2018, the World Bank Group announced $200 billion in funding over 5 years for climate action. Green bonds issuance continue to grow rapidly. For example, a new report by the Climate Bonds Initiative indicated that in 2019, green bonds issuance hit a record of $255 billion. Every year, the Climate Policy Initiative published their Global Landscape for Climate Finance report. In their recent report, they indicated that finance for climate action reached $579 billion in 2017-2018. It should be noted that this amount would likely include green bonds issuance and World Bank funding for the time period it is reported on. Therefore, all the numbers shown on the screen cannot simply be added together to estimate a larger total. To encourage investors, including the very wealthy, to invest in climate solutions, there is a growing range of financial incentives becoming available. You can view information about these incentives on a number of online platforms, including the Climate Finance Explorer by NDC Partnership, the Financial Navigator by the International Renewable Energy Agency, also known as ARENA, and finally a grants directory of projects in developing countries called the Terra Viva Grants Directory. Fortunately, rapid innovation is reducing the cost of technologies to increase food security, such as solar-powered irrigation. Shown here is a schematic illustrating this type of irrigation by Rainmaker Enterprises. In addition, there's a substantial growth of free educational information and low-cost digital services to support education. For example, last year, one NGO called 1 Billion was awarded a $5 million prize for developing an open-source, scalable software that empowers children to teach themselves basic reading, writing, and arithmetic within 15 months. Some other examples include the Rumi tablet that comes with a free educational apps developed by Rumi Initiative, which is based in Toronto, and the large offline e-library called Rougeot by World Possible that includes thousands of videos from the website Khan Academy and a copy of Wikipedia for students. The Rougeot e-library is available in multiple languages. One area that is often overlooked when speaking about climate action is education. Educating girls is one of the most effective but overlooked ways to help mitigate and adapt to climate change. Promoting girls' education and reproductive rights has a huge impact on lowering fertility rates. For example, research has shown that a woman with 12 years of schooling has almost 4 to 5 less children than a woman with no years of schooling. In addition, girls' education participate in leadership in climate action improves societal resilience. For example, for every year of schooling that girls receive in a country, on average, their respective country's resilience to climate disasters can be expected to improve by 3.2 points on the Global Adaptation Index. As well, education helps develop life skills for a green economy, nonviolent conflict resolution, increased food production, and job creation. If this education is implemented on a very substantial scale, we expect it will result in increased stability and human security. The impact of substantial climate action to prevent and/or mitigate conflicts can be significantly increased through international cooperation. This can make much better use of available funding, innovative technologies, and free education resources. International collaboration can be done through many ways. This includes coordinated programs by the UN-related organizations such as UNDP and collaboration of civil society organizations and volunteers. As well, collaboration with impact investment funds, including the ones who are members of the Canadian Forum for Impact Investment and Development, or otherwise known as CAFID. I feel one good example of collaboration of civil society organizations and volunteers is the Africa Climate Action Initiative. Through this initiative, several organizations, including ours, are combining expertise in Canada and Africa to access funding for substantial action. Each of the participants in this initiative share information about funding opportunities, funding applications, implementations, and lessons learned. This collaboration model can be expanded to include support from more countries to increase its impact. To facilitate information sharing, participants in the ACAI who are developing climate-related projects can use online platforms like the one shown here, which is the Blended Climate Finance Marketplace by ClimateFast Association. Platforms like these facilitate the initial connection between a project developer and an investor. Then the organization hosting this platform also provides a range of complementary services for a project developer to move his or her respective project forward. It takes considerable time and effort to obtain funding for larger projects. To illustrate this, here is a story that is still underway about seeking this funding. Last year, we submitted a concept note to Global Affairs Canada, or GAC, for a project in Ghana that was estimated to cost about $2 million. It was entitled Empowering Women with Smart Irrigation, Information, and Enterprise Support. Unfortunately, our submission was not selected by GAC for funding. When GAC announces their next call for similar types of concept notes, we plan to enhance our concept note and submit it again. In addition, we plan to customize and submit it to other funding organizations when possible. To expand the range of funding options, we will also explore blended finance opportunities where grant funding is combined with private sector investment and/or bank loans. As illustrated by this example, obtaining funding for larger projects requires considerable persistence and patience. In this case, more work is needed before we are successful. Therefore, we welcome the assistance of interested individuals who have proposal writing skills to help us complete the work that is needed. In conclusion, climate change is causing food insecurity for many millions of people in Africa. Fortunately, there is an opportunity to increase food security and community resilience. For example, there are hundreds of billions of dollars available for climate action, and it is possible to strategically utilize some of this money to fund projects to increase food security, such as solar-powered irrigation, and fund education, especially for girls, to help communities become more resilient to climate change. One good example of collaboration of civil society organizations and volunteers is the Africa Climate Action Initiative, which we discussed today. Through this initiative, several organizations, including ours, are combining expertise in Canada and Africa to access funding for substantial action. We recommend this collaboration model be scaled up substantially to help Africa rise to the challenge on climate change. Thank you for your time. As shown on this slide, to view this presentation again and/or related information, you can visit climatesand.org/IFS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for sharing that with us. And we'll have you in our Q&A period if folks have more questions about this video, right?
All right, thank you. Thank you.
And lastly, before we finish the official section of this launch, I want to share with you a wonderful video from one of our partners, which is the ChildFund Kenya, about tackling waste through education, collaboration, and hands-on action in Kenya. ChildFund supports the full development of the child, and increasingly, that means through climate action. This video is all about how change starts with each of us and how we can be part of the solution. So I'm inviting you to let yourself be inspired by the next video coming up. And we're hoping it will give us a little less trouble than the previous one.
This is tendance saying somebody else will do it. So you throw it, it's not your headache. There's a big rapid population growth. That's why you find a lot of garbage strewn around. And then also, there are no dedicated grounds where households can go and drop their garbage. Now, we're seeing an opportunity with children. So what we are saying is we have to demonstrate how that is variable if they don't throw garbage into the rivers. And then we have to give an alternative. If I don't throw into the river, because I cannot keep it in my house, where will I throw it?
And tell you we are very proud that you decided to bring this event to Kasarani. For the children, this is a starting point. We wish you are going to grow with the issue of environment and cleanliness within you.
To change behavior, you start with educating the children on the challenges and risks of mismanaging waste, especially plastics. Hoping that then from there, they'll move to the next level and start practicing the same at their homesteads.
We see benefits in bringing NGOs, communities, and various networks to various stakeholders that can be part of this to make it truly relevant and recognizable within the community. Within the cleanup, hopefully we can create in a new person the aha moment and say, wow, I could do this not just on a cleanup day, I could do this almost every day if I want to. Where Mr. Green Africa is really plugging in is trying to create an incentive-based model where we can pay people to bring back plastics and create a livelihood for themselves.
Before I was thinking that is disgusting, but I realized it makes a better environment. It has given me an opportunity to have a brighter future and to educate my children.
In such cleanup days, I think we can do a great deal within our other community-based organizations and try to change that narrative from waste is waste and I want to get rid of it to waste has a value. Through that, we can instill a more sustainable way of trying to change someone's behavior and show the community that there can be true benefits.
Partnership. Don't work alone. You have other people around. Like today, people from different parts of the world and children from different villages. So there. And the environment today is cleaner than it was last night. So it's doable. We start with yourself. Don't be part of the problem. Be part of the solution.
Well, I hope that was as amazing for you as it was for me. I'm always very touched when I see this video.
Same thing. Somebody also do.
Starting again with this. We are concluding, as I've mentioned, our official part. We are going to stay for a Q&A. But before that, I want to let Sarah Kamau, that you've seen at the beginning, come back and kind of conclude, tell you about what's next. It's been a real pleasure for me to be your host for tonight. I organize with Fridays for Future Toronto, which is the youth-led movement for climate action and climate justice. And I hope to see you all in the question session right after. But for now, Sarah, we're listening.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and more so that even the speakers, because we've heard a lot from the speakers on how climate change is affecting, and it is actually cutting across all sustainable development goals, from hunger to education to access to clean water, including food and all that, including even sustainability of cities. So I want to thank each and every speaker. But before I finalize, we want to call, as you've heard the last speaker, the last video says that it starts with you. So therefore, I'm inviting you for a call to action. And the call to action in this case is actually to invite each and every one of you to come and join Africa Climate Action Initiative, either by contributing your skills and in-kind resources, or alternatively contributing your resources. As you can see on the screen, we have Canada-Africa Partnership, ride.ca /ACAI. So we invite you to actually come and contribute and help us achieve this dream. And all the resources that you give us, it will go to our African partners. As you can see that we have 7 partners: Neloshan, Zakadia in Zanzibar, Neloshan in Kenya, ChildFund in Kenya. We also have Gabon and Park Policy in Ghana, and a wind partner in Gabon, and also in Somalia and South Sudan, Rainmaker and ANZ. So that money will be used for that initiative, for the projects in Africa. So we invite you to come and be a well-wisher, be a friend to ACI. And above all, we also need volunteers who can come and also give us skills in terms of accessing and achieving our dreams to make Africa to be sustainable when it comes to addressing the issues of climate shocks. Thank you very much and have a good time. So we are going to launch Africa Climate Action Initiative. So wherever you are, if you have a drink, I will invite you to come and toast with us and join us. I don't know whether it's possible that we can have everybody else and just be able to click on their video so that we can see. And I would like to invite you to, just join us and toast.
If every speaker wants to put their video on.
Yes. So to Africa Climate Action Initiative, I can't see other speakers, but even those who are at home, kindly join us and toast Climate Action initiative.
Okay,
Thank you
put
so
me
much for
on.
your time.
Ali, you need to put
Yes,
me
ma'am.
on.
Yeah.
I think you can all activate your own video.
So
Ali,
we
you need to
invite
put
you
my
now for
video on.
questions, and we address you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Over to you, Ali.
Thank you very much. I'm just enabling all your videos. I think you're able to do it yourself, or our technical team is able to do it as well. Okay, we've had a lot of questions, some extremely specific and narrow, some very, very broad. So we're going to try to have a few. I'm going to ask you, and I might have to cut you off, speakers, to keep your answers short and sweet for our people to just have a simple answer to what they were wondering. I know you all have so much knowledge to share, but now's the time to be concise. Okay, so we had a few questions about the initiative itself. So maybe this is for Sarah and others. What are the requirements for organizations to join the Africa Climate Action Initiative if there's an option for that?
So the organizations are required to send in the application, and then after that, we'll be able to assess them according to the activities that they are doing and even the capacity. And then after that, we'll be able to get back to them. So you can write to us at ACAI@climatesun.org or through CAP Network, because once you send your application, we have to also, once we assess, then we'll be able to register you. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And I think there was another question about the initiative itself. They asked if you had either partnerships or a chapter directly in Nigeria. So I don't know if you can speak to that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think at the moment, Climate Change Network Nigeria is going to be the partnering organization. We're still going to mobilize and then share the information across, and then more organizations will join up. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much. We had a few questions about the different levels, because we heard of the Paris Agreement, the Paris levels that are out there, and a few people were kind of wondering what even the levels from the Paris Agreement, if we maintained them, would mean for the African continent more specifically. Some people in the chat were saying it's not going to be enough. So if a few of you want to comment on that, please, I invite you to do so. Lynn, would you like to go?
Absolutely, we have to increase our climate ambition, and this is the year to do that. The Paris agreements would take us to a 3-degree rise, which is way too high. So we have to cut our emissions by 7% per year every year this decade. That's what the International Panel on Climate Change tells us. And that is a huge undertaking. And of course, it has to be done in the countries that are creating the emissions, which is countries like Canada.
Thank you. Anybody else have an answer to that? Not right now? Okay, and we do have a lot more donations coming in, so thank you so much. You can still donate. It will be appreciated by our partners. One question that I like to ask every time, and it's short answers are appreciated, but what keeps you personally motivated? What makes you continue every time, despite all the information you know? What keeps you motivated? So I want to hear from each of you something short, but something that could maybe inspire our listeners right now. Yinka?
Well, what keeps me motivated is this sort of energy, people using their backgrounds and basically using their time to be able to make the world a better place. The fact that we're all here mobilizing for climate change in Africa is part of the reason that I'm energized, because I see the change in the world through each and every one of us.
Wow, thank you.
I'd like to echo that, if that's okay. That I agree with you. Anytime I find myself feeling discouraged or concerned or a little bit like carrying that weight of the enormity of the challenge, I find it's always made better every time I connect with a partner on the ground. So the community that are actually dealing with this day in, day out, their energy and their positivity and their commitment and the energy really of communities at work, I always find really inspiring. And when you see what's happening on the ground, you can't help but want to do your part. And we know as Canadians what our part is. I think Lynn did a really good job of describing how we all need to take responsibility for our collective carbon footprint. But I think also through initiatives like this, showing acts of solidarity, be they financial or be they sharing of resources, ideas, capacity, access, partnerships, are really important. And that's where we come in, and we can really help projects that are already underway, that are being led by communities themselves.
Right, thank you. Anyone else? Steve, go ahead. Or Paul.
So, yeah, well, I see, I feel that there's one area that I can really help in, which is to create awareness of the larger funds that are available to really accelerate what's being done. You have a lot of smaller organizations, and they should have access, I believe, to the much greater funding that's actually coming into play. So I do hope that I can provide a contribution and show them how they can actually access much more funding.
Surveyor, did you want to go?
Yeah, I'm so motivated by this program because it's like a global action towards healing Africa of what climate change and other factors have already made it sick. And so I'm motivated to be part of it, and I'm motivated to also be an advocate of taking the message back home. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Kwame, go ahead.
Yeah, so ACAI is an idea whose time has come, right? And for me, what motivates me is the fact that being in the diaspora, I still have the opportunity to meet with like-minded colleagues to connect and try to solve issues back home. There's no such thing as bringing diverse ideas, experience, expertise, and above all, it's passion. What actually is driving us is not because we are learned or because of our rich profile, or because it's all about passion. And climate change activism and in advocacy, considering how the political barriers that we need to break. If we don't have the passion and the willpower, especially Friday for Future, I had the opportunity to attend one of your rallies in a very hot, sunny, and there's another one in a very cold weather with Paul Stevens. I'm like, I was freezing at a high point, but these are kind of energies that you need to be able to break through it. So yeah, these are the things that really energizes me and motivates me.
Awesome. And the Fridays for Future movements in Africa, especially in Nigeria, are actually really powerful right now and rising. Asume?
There's this quote that I like very much. I think it came from an Aboriginal Australian. I said, if you have come to help me, then you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then come and let us walk together. Always encouraged when I see people, even in the global north and global south, working together, not because of an understanding of the need to help anybody or to solve any problem for anybody, but an appreciation that we're all confronted as humanity by a common problem. I'm encouraged when I see Canadians acknowledge that even in Canada, that there are enormous injustices, against First Nations, and that there is social problems that need to be addressed here as well. And it is this kind of understanding that, we build the kind of solidarity that we need. And so that's encouraging.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Does anybody, Sarah?
What gives me hope is tomorrow, and knowing the fact that my children will look at me and ask me, what did I do for them? And that alone gives me the hope that I need to live a better world than I found it for them and even for my great-grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to try to add to that, top that? That was so inspiring. No? Everybody's gone a little shy.
I won't top it, but I'll just add that I think it's motivating that that the people who have come together for this and all of those watching are on the same page. And I think focusing on solutions, that's what's motivating. So rather than focusing on the problem, focusing on solutions and trying to breathe more life into into what's happening and give it the critical support that it needs. I think that's what the CAP network does well, and I think that's what this initiative and all of the people involved will do well. So I'm really, really happy to see this optimism, and it's like a fuel for sure.
Thank you. And Lynn?
I'd really like to thank all our viewers tonight, because you're part of the community now. We're all a community together. And to me, it's very exciting that this is happening, because it's got to be grassroots to grassroots. So I'm grateful to CAP Network for taking on this initiative and giving it a home. And all our donors, people who contributed tonight, you've helped start something really special. So thank you to everyone, all the panelists and all our tech team as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. If I can add what keeps me motivated, it's also that every fraction of the degrees we reduce matters. And if you think, well, I can't solve it all, there's so many degrees that are already up there in the atmosphere, that's okay, because any fraction of a degree will reduce some suffering and will help some people, and that has to matter. But it also makes us really responsible. Like anything we decide not to take care of will also matter in a negative way. And that's something that fuels me a lot. Maybe one last very short question for those of you that have, people have been asking, what are ways to get concrete information about what's happening on the ground, especially on the African continent? So if you have good sources that you use about climate action, climate solutions, or maybe the effects of climate change on the ground, I think people would like to hear from that. If you have any. Not so far, Sarah?
We've said that we have partners in those countries that you're operating with, and those partners are actually addressing some of the climate mitigation. And these are the partners that are actually giving us information, because we are not working on an island of our own. And they're also working with other partners, including the government and even other stakeholders.
Yeah, thank you. And checking out the Twitter and Instagram from Africa Climate Action Initiative will probably keep you informed really well as well. I want to go back to Vanessa to see if you want to share what keeps you inspired.
Hi, yeah, sorry I was a bit late there, but I just wanted to bring us back to our current situation. I mean, I know that the challenges are great, but if you look at what has happened recently and the sacrifices that every single person has made, the mobilization of money, resources, information, we have completely upended everything that we've done. So however great the challenges seem, we can do it. And we're doing it right now for the health, and now let's do it for the climate.
Yeah, thank you. I think these will be our concluding words. They're very wise. Well, thank you so much for sharing all the knowledge with all of us. Thank you to our viewers who stayed, and to the many donors. And I hope to hear you more, see you more fighting for climate justice around the world and here in Toronto. Round of applause for everybody, and have a great night.